G'day, Justin Hogg from RightSource here, talking not-for-profits and structures. One of the topics has been quite common lately, and done a couple of discussions both at a group and an individual level, is talking about federated models. Now, a federated model in the not-for-profit space is where a group of largely independent not-for-profits come together in a consolidated way to form another entity which combines resources to do something more effectively, more efficiently. Where you see federated models most commonly is where you have organisations that have been set up on a state basis. So like you have a Queensland and New South Wales, Victoria, charity all under the same name, and then they set up a national model, a national entity. And that national entity has all the states as members. So that's an example of a federated model. A lot of people think that is the federated model, but that is an example of a federated model. It's also quite often held up as one of the issues in the not-for-profit space in terms of not-for-profits being ineffective, in that they've got individual state entities working on their own thing, and then they've got a national body working on their own thing, and they're all doing HR and back office work, and each have got boards, so doesn't that speak to inefficiency? And because these are seen as inefficient, there's a lot of calls for these entities to merge, become one entity. And surely, if you become one entity rather than one for each state and one national and just be one, that you'll gain a lot of efficiencies because you won't have multiple boards, you can have one back office, you can do those type of things. Now, it's also posed that if those structures existed in the for-profit space, that someone would come in, purchase all the entities and basically amalgamate them anyway. And it's just because of the not-for-profit space that there is no commercial reality in it that's why it doesn't happen. Now, I'd like to challenge that a little bit, because in the for-profit space, there is an example of something similar to a federated model, and that is a joint venture. So a joint venture is the same sort of thing where two or more entities come together to form another incorporated entity that goes and undertakes a task on the benefit of all the joint venture parties. And it may not necessarily be specifically what the others do, or it might be, but it's in a specific geographical area, a specific project, something like that. So that in the for-profit space is seen as an effective use of resources and a good management of risk. So it does exist in the for-profit space. So if we're saying that there are examples of these type of models, that federated type of model working, perhaps rather than looking at how do we get rid of them, how do we make them work better? So there's a couple of things that you can do that I would suggest can make the existing federated models work out much more effectively than how they're currently operating. Now, the first and the most common thing that happens with a federated model is each of the states have a representative they put on to the federated or the national board entity. So that quite often is either the CEO or the chair of the state organization goes and sits on the board of the national. Now, though that makes sense from a representative point of view, it doesn't make sense from an effective governance point of view. If you set up a national body to do things like advocating or national fundraising or tackle national issues across all states that are specific, and you've given that national entity a specific task to do, which is different to the state-based entities, surely what you want at that national level is a board made up of directors who have the skills for the task that you're giving that national entity to do, which by definition, because you're setting it up to do things that the states aren't able to do effectively, is a different skill set. So really what you're looking to do is have a skills-based board of that national entity. Now, as a first suggestion, that can often make the states quite nervous because, well, what if they go off and do something different? Well, there's two caveats to this. The first one is the states still remain the members of that national body. So as the members, you have the ability to change the board, or to, if the directors aren't doing what the states as a collective are wanting to do, they can change the board. So there's definitely still the ability to provide feedback and the ability to make a change to the board if needed. The other thing it does is it creates, at that national level, the boardroom discussions are more about how do we achieve the purpose of why that national entity was set up, as opposed to a state-based, well, Queensland wants to do this, WA wants to do that, New South Wales thinks it should be done this way, and it becomes more of a jostling as to, a power-based discussion in terms of how the entity should move forward and how it's benefiting their particular state, not necessarily thinking about how the national entity is fulfilling its purpose. So for me, skills-based boards is something that we all talk about in the not-for-profit space, about the benefits they have to an organization. It's the same example here with the federated model. That national entity should have a skills-based board, and you'll get a much greater value out of that entity. The second thing in terms of the federated model and making it work better for everybody is tackling what I would see as a general level of frustration the states would have with the national body. Now, this is where you have talk like the state saying, oh, the national body is trying to tell us to do this. They don't have any jurisdiction on telling us what we do. That's not their job. Or the state saying, we thought they were going to provide us this service, but they haven't. Or they were going to deliver us these things, but they haven't done it. And similarly, the national body going, well, the states are supposed to provide us certain support, but they haven't provided the support, or they're not acting consistently with how, we all agreed to do things. So how this is tackled, and this happens that happens in a federated model, but it also happens within entities as well. So it's not unusual to hear those type of things talked about when you're in a not-for-profit that is one entity. So the fact that it's a federated structure isn't the cause of that frustration. It's the cause of that frustration is that there's not clear policies and guidelines or agreements on how things are going to work. Not only do they have to be clear, they have to be enforced, or people have to be held accountable. So if you're going to have a federated model that's then responsible for advocacy at a national level, the states should then let them do it. So the states should then not be getting involved in doing advocacy themselves at a national level if they set up an organization to do that. So it's about having a clear agreement, understanding the roles and responsibilities of each of the entities that are involved, which should be consistent with their own individual constitutions and their own purpose in those constitutions. But then once that's agreed, make sure that's maintained. And so there's obviously the setting the accountability, there's holding people account to it, ensuring they have the resources to do that stuff. But then as things adapt and change, coming back and revisiting those things. So if there is frustration, if there isn't clarity, having a method and a process to resolve that through updating policies or agreements so that everyone knows what everyone else is doing and that you are working as a collective. I think it is a false truth to think that if everyone merges and we all become one entity, then we can just tell everybody what to do and that solves everything. Because when you look at not-for-profits that are one entity, that they still have exactly the same problems. So I think we should definitely take our time looking at federated models. And if you're in a federated model, look at doing some of these things you can do to improve the way that it works, as opposed to saying, well, this is the model that we're given and it doesn't work. It can work, and it does work in multiple situations. So have a look at those two suggestions and see if they're a first step towards making a federated model more of a joy to work for than a frustration. That was it for today. I'm going to do another video. You can check this out on our YouTube in terms of perhaps federated models having some more meaningful impact to the not-for-profit space. So if you're interested in that, check out the YouTube. Otherwise, thanks for your time today. It's been Justin Tong from RightSource.